Here in the United States, I think we continue to make strides in religious toleration.
And we must always remain on guard for religious intolerance.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
And I'm also very glad that you've joined us for today's program. Welcome to the American Religious Town Hall meeting. In just a few moments, I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do. But before that, I would like to say a special welcome to those of you who may be tuned in for the very first time. We're always glad to pick up new viewers and spread the word. We'll be happy to have you a part of the family. Let's have our panelists tell us who they are and a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, serving as the senior minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas, which is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University, which is in Berrien Springs, Michigan, and is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And my name is Mel Robeck. I'm senior professor of church history and ecumenics and special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I am also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
As you can see, we have an excellent panel assembled here today, each one an expert in his or her own field. Glad you could be here today for this discussion. Let's get right into it. In a new book on the history of religion in the United States entitled Sacred Liberty, Americans' Long, Bloody, and Ongoing Struggle for Religious Freedom, Stephen Waldman claims that while at the beginning of the United States, certain colonies were remarkably intolerant. For example, the Quakers in Puritan Massachusetts were whipped and hanged. The trend in American religious historical development is toward greater toleration. To be sure, terrible anti-Mormon, anti-Catholic, and anti-Jewish movements have marked U.S. history. But he claims that it was World War II that shifted American attitudes towards tolerance when soldiers from all walks of life and faith learned to live and fight and pray together. Waldman argues that the move toward greater acceptance continues. In peacetime, workplaces have become more diverse. By 2010, about half of all Americans had a spouse of a different religious tradition. The nuns, spelled N-O-N-E-S, people with no religious affiliation, now make up 40% of 18 to 44-year-olds. Until recently, it would have been unheard of to have a Supreme Court that has only Jewish and Roman Catholic justices and no Protestant representation. Americans have arrived at a place described by Robert Putnam and David Campbell in American Grace. Quote, "It is difficult to demonize the religion or lack of religion of people you know and especially those you love." In light of these issues, we would like our panelists today to consider at least these three questions. First of all, why do you think that Americans are more devout in their religious practices than Western Europe, yet also more accepting of other religious traditions? Another question, do you believe toleration of other faiths is accelerating in America? And if so, why or why not? How optimistic should we be about the prospects of religious freedom and acceptance of other religious traditions? Well, that is the topic for today's subject. You've heard two of the panelists already make opening statements. We're going to go back to them to continue our discussion and elucidate it a little more. Let's go back to Mel Robeck. Dr. Robeck, more comments on the subject, please.
Yes. I've lived virtually all my life in California, which is on the Pacific Rim. And if I go to San Francisco, I'm going to run into Chinese temples. If I go into Los Angeles, I'm going to run into both Chinese and Japanese temples that are Buddhist temples. I don't know how many we have in LA, but we have some very large ones, and I would guess that there are probably a dozen or so Japanese Buddhist temples in an area where I frequent quite often. And I think that's to be expected. On the Pacific Rim, you would expect those kinds of religions to come in. It's also the case that the Hindus were sending evangelists, gurus, to Los Angeles and San Francisco back at the turn of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century. So we have self-realization fellowship kinds of things, and we have Hindu kinds of gardens and so forth. So, I mean, all of those kinds of things are familiar. Islam is not so familiar. Islam really has come in through the East Coast and Chicago and Philadelphia and New York and so forth. So some people in the United States have seen those kinds of mosques present for years, whereas in Pasadena, California, I know of a small one, it's a kind of a storefront mosque, and it's very small. And I have to go probably 10 miles to the east before I find one that actually has a minaret. And it's a house-sized church, mosque, And then I can go another 30 miles before I find a real mosque that has a couple of minarets and so forth. So, it's fairly rare. But they have been welcomed within the community. I go to a physician for my eyes who is a Muslim, and he and I have had great relationship, and he's constantly trying to get me to come join with his group to do this or that in a social justice kind of thing, which I'm quite open to do. It's just he always wants me to do it on Sundays when it's my day of rest, But so I don't do that. But the fact of the matter is, I pray for him, and I believe that he prays for me. This week he's on Hajj, so it'll be interesting to see next month when I go see him. How was Hajj? And again, when we saw the kind of massacres of people, we used to have a rabbi on the show, Jordan Offshire, and Jordan is a good friend. He's a good friend. So when the shooting took place recently in the synagogue in San Diego and so forth, I called him up and said, Jordan, I want you to know that I'm with you and I'm praying for you and your people and so forth. I think this is a common kind of a thing. When they had the big shooting in New Zealand in that mosque, I wrote a letter to my doctor and I said, I want you to know that I'm praying for you and your people. This is what I as a Christian am called to do. I think this is really the way most people in the United States think. I don't think that they are looking at Muslims and saying, oh, gee, there's terrorists, we don't want those mosques around. There are those people, and we have certainly seen that in spades in certain people, but I don't think that's the norm. I want to address also the whole question of devotion and how we count devotion, because I think here in the United States we have a tendency always to count devotion by how many people are in church on a Sunday, and we do have a very high record of roughly 50% or more, whereas in Scandinavia it's 3 to 5%, and even in Southern Europe, which is much more church-oriented, it's up in the 25% area. So, I think we have to be careful about counting numbers and calling that devotion.
All right, thank you very much. And then Dr. Trovall, welcome to the program. You also began the program with an opening statement. Please elucidate that, if you will.
Well, I think that, Mel, embedded in your remarks about the openness and the friendship and your solidarity with those people who've experienced trauma in their faith communities, you opened up, of course, the other side of the question, which is religious intolerance is probably something that's always going to be with us, sadly. Yeah. We hope that it would disappear, but that it always remains there lurking, and it takes constant vigilance to keep working on it. And that's really more my point, is that we need to stay on guard. I had a world history professor, I remember asking him, I said, do you think things are getting better or worse? And he said, well, things are getting better and better and worse all the time. Mm-hmm. And that was a profound moment for me, because it helped me see that that progress is not inevitable. It's only when all of us work together to bring about the values that we want to see in the world. And this is a value I'm committed to, and I hope that other people are too. And it will continually progress, I believe, when we all work at it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Matthews, glad to have you back here today, too. What are your thoughts on this?
Good being here. I think this is a very interesting topic. All the questions are great. Number one is really intriguing. Why do you think that Americans are more devout? That led me to research two studies from 2014, 2017 from the Pew Research Center. And they asked this question, and they surveyed folks in Europe and in the United States. And according to the survey, 2/3 of the United States Christians, they pray daily, 68%, as opposed to 18% of folks across Europe. So that may be one answer to why Americans are viewed to be more devout. And similarly, 27% of the religious nuns in the United States who describe themselves as agnostics, atheists, or nothing in particular, they believe in God with an absolute certainty. So, of course, an atheist believing in God, I thought that was interesting as well, as opposed to 1% in across Europe. So, when I looked at this and kind of processed it, it says to me that people in the United States they pray to a God. And they believe that there is a higher power, and I thought that was really, really interesting. And I'll say more later on.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Luxton, your comments, please.
Yeah, thank you. The other side of that statement, the question that was asked, states, yet this is America versus Europe, are also more accepting of other religious traditions. I will actually be interested in seeing how that conclusion is reached, because having Europe as my initial home before I immigrated here, while the first part is absolutely true, I would not have assumed the second. And maybe we're talking about many different countries in Western Europe, so where exactly are you talking about there? So I want to put the more cautionary side to this. I have a nephew, two nephews actually, that came from England to live with me. Both of them felt, after moving from the United Kingdom then to Canada then to US, felt the US was the least tolerant of the three. One of them grew up in London, where he was a minority in his school, and most of his friends were Hindus and Muslims. And he felt that there was a much more accepting attitude within that environment than he saw here. Now, it may depend what part of the country you're in also, but I participate in a group that is interfaith in our region, and recently we met, and certainly the Muslim cleric, and to some degree the representative from the Jewish community, both expressed grave concerns about what their community was experiencing. So I think there are great examples of tolerance and people coming together, and this group is one example of that. But I think there's also still quite a ways for us to go where people really feel accepted as part of the American community. And it starts with individuals and also communities. But nationally, I think there's some of the rhetoric that is still out there, not just politically, but among other groups, it still remains a concern.
All right, thank you. Let's hear now from Bishop Olson. What are your thoughts, please?
It's an interesting topic. I think it's one that's certainly shifting from the modern period to this postmodern period, which I'm not sure we know what to make of yet entirely, because it's still shifting. In the sense of the modern period in the United States is certainly a modern country. One of the things that differentiated us with regard to religion from Europe was that there was no state religion at all. And so people didn't identify with a religion for political purposes or governmental purposes, but they did for cultural purposes or familial purposes. And so there's a real strong bond, perhaps culturally, and some of that fostered by immigration and those experiences, or an agrarian society. And then while there's a residue of that left, the aspect of the creedal identification, which is a strong identity with the creed and with the doctrine of a religious organization, is smaller, right? And so whether it takes the form of evangelism or doctrinal apologetics, things like that. And in Europe, that was the same phenomena. I mean, there were sort of people, there's an expression, I'm a Catholic, I'm not a fanatic, in the sense of that, like, that's the church I don't go to. It's your church, but you don't go to it, you don't really practice it. I think today, there's a new religion, and I think to identify, I think secularism is a religion. I mean, it has a code of ethics, and it has a worldview, and there's something binding to it. And in the sense of tolerance, I should say, really is one of the bonding principles of that. And with that, a certain indifference to anything doctrinal that might, in a sense, have to be rationally discussed or come to conclusion. And I think that's still where the nuns are going to,
Yes.
no identification, so to speak. I think there is an identification with that. And we'll see how that all falls forward.
All right, thank you, Reverend Plumley.
Thank you. I wish these scholars were correct. I would hope that they are, but I'm not sure that they are. They do begin by recognizing that we've had a long and bloody history of religion in this country. It has been different from other countries, and that's undeniable. And I think it has been better than most other countries anyway. But still, throughout history, you can find whole eras, and including today, when religion is so often used as a club against someone. I think, talking about the nuns, I think one of the things that nuns point to as the reason they are what they are, the reason they do not choose a faith group to be a part of, is because their experience with faith groups, whether it's personal and close, or whether it is simply through the media or in some other way, what they have seen of religion, they don't want any part of because they view it as intolerant. So we ain't perfect, and I'm not sure if these guys are even right.
All right.
Correct.
Fair enough then. Dr. Matthews.
Well, I think this is one reason why we need to get back to teaching our young people the distinction between what's religious versus what's a relationship. In Christianity, it's a relationship with a person and not necessarily with a set of do's and don'ts. And this is a major problem that we hear among young people, is that I don't want to affiliate with your church or with any type of religion because of the do's and don'ts and all of the rules, where Christianity is a relationship with a person. And I think that's important for us to really put that message out.
Bishop Olson.
I think again, grace completes or fulfills nature in a lot of ways, and I think with belonging to a religion sometimes comes out of belonging to a family. And I think a lot of the folks who identify themselves as none, as far as belonging to a faith community, especially their sense of belonging and how they identify belonging in family life is radically different, and it's left sort of by how they identify themselves as opposed to something they're born into. I think that's an effect too.
We just have a few seconds remaining, literally 30. Dr. Luxton.
As I've been listening to this conversation, the question that kind of comes up in my mind is, It would be concerning if we're saying that it's the people who become the nuns who are more tolerant. So I think the challenge to us is to make sure that is absolutely not the truth.
All right, thank you. That's all the time we have for this segment, and interesting thoughts so far. There is a summary coming up, but before we get there, I would like for you to stand by for this important message. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. So glad you stood by for this segment of the program. We're going to go to the summations in a moment. But I would like to also encourage you to go to the website and learn about the Town Hall Estates. You can see past programs. We've archived them there for you. And you can also use your email to send us a note regarding what you would like to see discussed at the Town Hall. Let's go to our summations at this time, and we'll begin with Bishop Olson.
I think American religiosity is something that is changing and developing constantly, and the current situation is so fluid, it's hard to really get our bearings as to what shape it's taking at this point. What I would say is that contemporary religion, as in the past, involves relationship, it involves a sense of belonging, and it involves a creedal commitment.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Troval.
I think I buy the thesis overall of Stephen Waldman, and I just one personal story, and that is I grew up in a small community in Minnesota where I think there were pretty much only Lutherans and Catholics, and I just remember saying, you don't go into a Catholic church ever. I mean, obviously you play with them every day at school, but you don't go into the church. And I was amazed as I've gotten older how intolerant my childhood was between the Lutherans and Catholics. Not that they didn't respect one another. And I feel a completely different sense of that. And I hope that that's the spirit that we've moved and grown into. Now, we still have our issues and our problems as a culture, but I hope that it's getting better.
Thank you very much. Dr. Luxton, your summation, please.
No, it seems to me that if we are mature in our own faith tradition, that provides confidence that we're in that faith tradition because that's what we believe in, and that's how it should be. But that confidence should bring us the capacity to be able to be tolerant of where other people are, and not feel like we have something to protect and not they're the other. And so hopefully that we can find both things, be confident in our own faith tradition, but at the same time embrace the fact of where others are.
Thank you. Dr. Robeck, your summation.
Yeah, I think, intolerance breeds intolerance. And what's interesting about this country in particular is that it was built by people who had not been tolerated within the European setting. They were all dissidents. Now, that being said, the first thing they did was they established a very intolerant kind of government here, especially in Massachusetts and so forth. But the second that Roger Williams comes along here and the Baptists begin to emerge, or William Penn in Pennsylvania, we start to get these seeds of tolerance. And I think that we have made a lot of headway since that time that demonstrates that toleration is a growing concern. At the same time, Carl, I'm with you when it comes to the concern about, guaranteeing that religious freedom stays religious freedom. I must have been in the second grade, possibly the third, but no further than that, when my teacher, who I have no idea what her faith tradition was or whether she had one, was very clear about certain kinds of freedoms that we have to continue to fight for. And one of them that I remembered was religious freedom. And I think that's still true.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Matthews.
Yes, religious freedom is just it's precious, and we should all continue to pray that we have such freedom. And I don't want to split hairs, but the last question, how optimistic should we be about the prospect of religious freedom and acceptance of other religious traditions? I'm not sure that from a Christian standpoint that the goal should be acceptance, but I think respect, because we do have different faiths, and I think everyone needs to respect the other religions rather than accept them.
All right, thank you. And so, Reverend Plumley, your summation, please.
Thank you. Disciples out in the audience would jump all over me if I didn't speak up for our identity as disciples of Christ, as a group that was born out of the conflicts in American history between various faith groups and the real hatred that there was between faith groups. We see ourselves and have seen ourselves throughout our history as not only a tolerant group but an affirming group. We are, however, we must confess that we are sometimes intolerant of the intolerant, and that becomes a problem for us. And I think a lot of us Americans need to take a second look at that particular piece of our inheritance as well.
Thank you. One thing for sure around this table, we do support religious freedom, and we will do that strongly and sometimes vociferously in order to preserve what we believe is our blessing. We're so glad that you've tuned in today, and I want to thank all of the panelists for being here, for participating in this discussion. It's right at the heart of why the American Religious Town Hall exists, and the founder who conceived of this certainly had this in mind. And we do want to thank Bishop Leisky all those many years ago for having the foresight of developing a program like this one. And to his credit, we are here today. So thank you. And thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed today's program. We are looking forward to getting together next time. But until then, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over this very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.